boy, tonight I am the PS on the letter. All this wonderful entertainment and these wonderful people. It's tough, but I'm going to try to say a few things. You know, when I was called to come this evening and do this, they said, we want you to talk about some of the things that have happened in the past and what you might do to change things for the better for the future. And I said, well, I'll offend some people. And they said, that's all right, you go ahead and offend. So if you're on the receiving end of some of these comments, I want you to know it's only done with the idea of helping the industry and making it better. And I also want to make a little apology. I recall in high school, I had really a dumb public speaker instructor. And the only thing he was a Scotsman, what could you expect? And his name was McElrath, does that prove it? And anyhow, he dribbled when he talked, on top of it, you see. And the one thing he did say that was very worthwhile was, don't always say, I did this, and I thought this, and we did this. He said, don't do a I, my, me, mine kind of talk. But you see, when they ask to talk about the past in your memoirs, what else can you do? So please excuse the many personal references that I'm going to tell you about tonight. This happened some years ago, and I was in Omaha. I had a show at 8 o'clock, and I even forget what it was, but I also had a speaker up in Sioux Falls that I'd never seen, that I had never known, anything like that, and he was going to come down and do a show on Spain. And the phone rang at 7:45, 15 minutes before curtain time. They said, Dick, there's an important phone call for you in the office. And oh my gosh, he says, long distance, all right. So I went, hello? Hello, Mr. Walter? Yes? This is your speaker for tomorrow night. And I said, I can still think, my gosh, I've been to Spain a couple times. I'll see that film tomorrow. I will give the talk. And I said, well, that's nice. How are you? And he said, well, I'm fine. He said, I just wanted to give you something to worry about. The next day when I met him, it concerned me because he always had his nose in the book. Your first visit to Spain, and here's my expert, you see. And I said to him, I said, well, how many times have you done this show? Well, if you were in Sioux Falls last night, you would have been at the world premiere. Now that man, I love him. He's in this room. And he's a special person. And I tell you, he is the kind of guy that I wish somebody had grabbed a hold of him when he was a young man and really managed him and told him to do this and told him to do that, because he'd be another Will Rogers. And really, he's a very special person. And you all have guessed by this time, Bill Stockdale. You know, I almost missed this business because I had been in show business and I was bringing stars and I was bringing things, and the travelogue appealed to me because it's class. Let's not kid ourselves, it's class. And I got the museum in town, and they had never, mind you, you people have been with me, it's a beautiful multi-million-dollar building, all marble and all, I mean, endowed. It's lovely, lovely, lovely. And they had a rule that you could never rent it to a private person for private profit. And do you know that one man on the board of directors had seen a travelogue in Chicago and said, no, we should have this in Omaha, let Dick have it. So as a result, I had the first time, it was the first time that they ever permitted private profit in the hall. Well, this was great, and our first show was Kurt Nagel, and some of you remember him, and it was London. And I tell you, I went all over Omaha. I had everybody London conscious. I went to schools, I went to photography shops, I went to everybody, boy, London, London. I had them thinking the Queen was coming and would probably bring a band along, you know, that kind of thing. And so what does Kurt Nagel tell me? As the old-timers will recall, he and his partner, Moore, used to swap the films and all like that. And he said, Dick, I hate to tell you this, but they shipped me the wrong film. Here I had a whole house waiting for London. They shipped me Paris. I said, that's great. I said, what do we do? He said, well, go ahead, okay. So I went out, and you know what I did? It's the only smart thing I did in my whole life in all the travelogues. I said, ladies and gentlemen, we were planning on going to London tonight, but you know, these days it's a wonderful thing, but London's fogged in, and we have to go on to Paris. And It worked. It worked. It worked. And we've often kidded about that. But since then, let me tell you some of the recent things, too. You can't do a talk about past and be. I'm going to be nasty a little later, but I'm going to be nice now for a while. You can't do a show and talk about funny things without thinking of Don Cooper. And when Don was with me the last time, great as always, funny as always, big house and all that sort of thing. And afterwards, a lady came to me in the lobby and she said, Mr. Walter, I lived in Montana for 17 years and I never heard of DeBorgia. And Don was on the other side of the hall and I called him over. I said, Mr. Cooper, I said, this lady's lived in 17 years in Montana and never heard of your town of DeBorgia. He said, well, when she went by, maybe there was a semi in front. And she was happy. Everything was lovely. I called him one time, and Ruth answered, and it was snow. It was winter, and she said, just a minute, he's out shoveling the drive. And I said, fine. Can you wait? And I felt I waited an eternity. And when he came on, I said, Don, I've been waiting forever. And he said, my drive's a mile and a half long. So that was it. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of things from show business, because some funny things have happened, and I think you might appreciate it. I was asked to mention some of the other stars and stuff like that. When I played a musical, the major musicals, we'd play them 8 performances, play a whole week, 6 nights, 2 matinees. But I could never enjoy them because, I had to worry about the temperature upstairs, everybody happy, is there gum on the seat, all that sort of stuff. And quite often my wife and I would go over to Des Moines to see the show, where we could sit and not be bothered. The shows generally played Chicago, Des Moines, Omaha. And this particular show we went over to see was Sound of Music. And the star, it was the first time around, my star was Florence Henderson, a lovely lady who sings very well and, of course, is still big on television. But anyhow, after the show, we'd met the company manager and we knew him and all this and that. The show was great, of course, wonderful show. And the company manager is just so upset afterwards. He's just so upset. And I said, Al, I said, what are you worried? Oh, he said, I said, the show went great. I said, the people loved it. He said, that isn't my problem. That isn't my problem. I'm so worried. In the back of the theater, which was an alley, there was a fire escape on the theater, and right across the alley was the telephone company's office, with an office and a window in every place. And he said, I hope I'm going to. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, a couple of a boy and a girl from the chorus went out on the fire escape and were making violent love, and everybody in the telephone building was watching them. And I said, well, it's young people. What do you forget? It doesn't mean anything. It's all like that. And he said, yeah, but what if they took a picture? And I said, so who would take a picture? And he said, yeah, but he said, she was in her nun's uniform and he had his Nazi uniform on. So that would be quite a shot, wouldn't it, out on the fire escape. But just to mention a few of the other people, when I think of travelogue people and we can learn some lessons, Arthur Fiedler and the Boston Pops, which I presented many times, Fred Waring, I think I presented him on his 7th annual farewell tour, among others. And both of them had selected Omaha because we could make the right things available to start their spring tours, different years, of course. And I attended the rehearsals. And folks, there's something we can learn from Arthur Fiedler and that we can learn from Fred Waring. They were both perfectionists. They were devils in the rehearsal. They would bawl a person out. They would raise a row because they wanted it right. And that's what we should do in travelogues too. Don't compromise. Make it absolutely right. And as I say, I've seen Fiedler bawl out a man like you can't believe, and then they're walking off stage and he says, well, how's Jimmy? Is he feeling better? I mean, the show is one thing. Your personal life's another. And that's really one thing that we can learn from people like that are great stars, that we should remember. Perfectionism should be our goal. Now, I could talk, I have a little funny thing about Henry Fonda. Not so funny, he, of course, was born in Omaha. But do you know that it was peculiarly, I think I'm the only presenter in the country that had, at different times, presented both Henry Fonda and his son Peter. But there's a catch. Henry Fonda didn't want his boy to go to college in a big town. Henry Fonda's good friend was the chairman of Zenith Radio Corporation, and his name was McDonald. And McDonald and Fonda said, let's send our boys to the University of Omaha, which they did. And I got my ushers from the University of Omaha, so Peter Fonda ushered for me, and years later, his dad, Henry, we did Darrow. So I'm the only one in the country that had father and son working. The sad part is the idea of having the boys spend in Omaha was good, but the other boy, the McDonald boy, maybe you remember, he committed suicide, overdose, a year or so later. So, I mean, it's a sad thing, but Henry the boy has just become a real family man. Now, we could talk about Mickey Rooney and Ginger Rogers. Miss Rogers is great. Mickey Rooney was put out in Omaha because you recall the film Boys Town made Boys Town. I mean, it was a fine charity that some people knew about, but when they did the film with Spencer Tracy and all that, the whole world learned about Mickey Rooney. And I had approached Boys Town before we played a week. We played Mickey Rooney and Ann Miller in Sugar Babies. And I approached Boys Town if they'd like to do something. Well, they didn't, you know, typical short-sightedness. And do you know that when he came, he rented a car, and he went out one day and drove around Boys Town, which is a multi-million-dollar thing. And when he came back, he said, you know, Dick, he said, I'm the only one left of the principals of Boys Town. And he said, they didn't want to do anything? And I said, no. And he said, you know, they could have named a street after me. And I mean, he was really sad that as far as Boys Town was concerned, he was an outcast. It really moved him. I'm going to say a few words about Betty Grable, because she is a fine performer, and believe it or not, I've presented my Hello Dolly 3 different times, each time a major engagement. And Betty Grable was my first star with Hello Dolly. Most people don't remember when she toured. But this is a case of a person being a product. She was a Hollywood product. I mean, they took this girl and they got the publicity works churning, and she had talent. But I mean, an artist, well, that's another thing. When you talk about Ginger Rogers, she was an artist. But Betty Grable was a product. And I want to tell you something funny about this. The way you can tell a star as far as show business is concerned, the litmus test is that their name is above the title. You never saw an ad that said, Gone with the Wind with Clark Gable. It was always Clark Gable in Gone with the Wind. And that's what they'll fight for. They'll turn down a big contract if they don't get top billing. Incidentally, the 2 miracles that are still going are Carol Channing and Victor Borge. Miss Channing's still every now and then going out and doing the Dolly. It's one of the great moments in show business when those fellas line up the steps and she comes in and they sing Hello Dolly. I mean, it's worth all the worry and work and junk you go through to feel the pulsation in the audience when that happens. Now, the next things I'm going to do here, because I can't keep you up all night, you want to get to that party, I'm going to make some general observations about travelogues. We're going to forget show business now. I mean the theater, and make some things, and then I'm going to make some remarks directed directly at the artists, the managers, the sponsors.